Introduction: Facing Your Inner Fears. Welcome back to the second part of our journey toward mastering your inner peace. In the first part, we explored how to recognize the true nature of others, let go of negativity, and set boundaries to protect your energy. These lessons laid the foundation for resilience and clarity, but our journey doesn't stop there. In this second part, we're diving deeper. Life often challenges us with rejection, criticism, and the constant pressure to meet expectations. How do we remain true to ourselves when faced with the fear of judgment or the temptation to sacrifice our peace to please others? How do we stay focused on our own growth amidst the distractions of comparison and societal expectations? Through the timeless teachings of Buddhism and the wisdom of Stoicism, we'll uncover how to embrace rejection as a stepping stone to growth, overcome the fear of judgment, and live authentically. Stop sacrificing your peace to please others. Focus on what truly matters, your inner world and personal growth. This is the part of the journey where we face our deepest fears and find the strength to rise above them. Let's continue walking this path together, discovering how to turn life's challenges into opportunities for transformation and true freedom. 7. Reframe challenges as opportunities. Ethan stared at his inbox, the rejection email glowing on the screen like a silent accusation. It wasn't the first rejection, far from it, but this one felt heavier. He had spent weeks preparing for the interview, poring over every detail, imagining how this job could be the fresh start he needed. Now, all of that seemed pointless. His shoulders slumped as he pushed the laptop aside, burying his face in his hands. "Why does this keep happening to me?" he muttered. The frustration churned inside him, and for a moment, he considered giving up altogether. But then he remembered a phrase he had heard at the temple during a visit months ago: "What stands in the way becomes the way." The monk had said it with such certainty that it lingered in Ethan's mind. Even now, seeking clarity, Ethan decided to return to the temple that evening. The head monk, Venerable Surya, greeted him with a kind smile, sensing the weight Ethan carried. They sat quietly for a moment before Ethan finally spoke. "I keep trying, and I keep failing," he said, his voice heavy. "It feels like no matter what I do, it's never enough." The monk nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "Have you ever seen a potter at work?" Ethan frowned, unsure of the relevance. "A long time ago," he replied. The monk continued, "When the potter shapes clay, does the pot take form perfectly on the first attempt?" Ethan shook his head. "No, they shape it, refine it, and sometimes start over." The monk smiled. "Exactly. Each mistake is not a failure but a step toward perfection." The Buddha teaches us that life's challenges are the fire that refines us, like clay in the kiln. Without the fire, the pot cannot harden, and without the shaping, it cannot take form. Ethan was silent, the monk's words stirring something within him. The monk added, "Rejection is not the end of the path, it is the path. Ask yourself, what is this teaching you? What part of your clay is being shaped?" That night, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the potter. He opened his notebook and began writing, pouring out his frustrations and fears. Then, he asked himself the monk's question: "What is this teaching me?" Slowly, he began to see the patterns. His interviews had all been technically strong, but he had avoided discussing his setbacks or vulnerabilities. He realized he had been trying to appear perfect, rather than authentic. The next week, Ethan had another interview. This time, he approached it differently. When asked about challenges he had faced, he spoke openly about his rejections, framing them as lessons. Each time I've been turned down, I've reflected on what I can do better. It's made me more adaptable, more determined, and more self-aware. The interviewer leaned forward, intrigued. That's an interesting perspective, they said. Not everyone sees setbacks that way. A few days later, Ethan received the call he had been waiting for. He got the job, but more importantly, he realized something had shifted within him. The rejection letters he had once dreaded no longer defined him. They were just part of his journey, shaping him like the potter's hands shaping clay. In the weeks that followed, Ethan found himself facing new challenges at work, tight deadlines, critical feedback, and moments of self-doubt. But each time, he returned to the monk's words, "The fire refines us." He began to welcome these moments, asking himself not, "Why is this happening to me?" but "What can I learn from this?" Buddhism teaches that suffering is not a punishment but a teacher. The Buddha said, "Pain is certain, but suffering is optional." Ethan realized that by resisting his setbacks, he had been amplifying his pain. By accepting them as opportunities, he found freedom and growth. Marcus Aurelius's Stoic wisdom echoed this truth. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Ethan saw that challenges weren't obstacles, they were stepping stones. One day, while visiting the temple again, Ethan shared his story with the monk. The monk listened with a knowing smile, then said, "The clay is beginning to take shape. Continue to let life mold you." Ethan left the temple feeling lighter. He now understood that the path to success wasn't about avoiding challenges, but embracing them as the very tools that would shape him into his best self. The Buddha's words echoed in his heart, "No mud, no lotus. It is through struggle that we bloom." 8. Limit your exposure. Anna sat in her car outside the cafe, staring at her phone. Inside, her friend Jess was waiting, likely with the same stories of complaints and criticisms that had filled every recent conversation. For years, Jess had been Anna's closest confidant, but lately, spending time with her felt like stepping into a storm of negativity. Anna sighed, gripping the steering wheel. Was she a terrible friend for feeling this way? She had been taught to value loyalty, but at what cost? That evening, still troubled, Anna visited a small temple she had often passed but never entered. She found the head monk, Venerable Arun, tending to a small fountain. The sound of water flowing over stones calmed Anna's thoughts, and she approached hesitantly. The monk noticed her and motioned for her to sit. Anna explained her struggle, her voice low with guilt. "I don't want to abandon Jess, but every time we meet, I leave feeling drained. It's as if her negativity follows me, and I can't shake it off. What kind of friend does that make me?" The monk listened carefully, then asked, "Have you ever carried a heavy bag on a long journey?" Anna nodded. "Yes, of course. It's exhausting." The monk smiled gently. "And what happens when you put the bag down for a moment to rest?" "I feel lighter. I can keep going," Anna replied, puzzled. The monk continued, "In life, some burdens are not ours to carry indefinitely. Supporting someone doesn't mean holding their weight forever. Sometimes, we must put the bag down, not to abandon it, but to regain our strength." Anna stared at the rippling water, letting the words sink in. The monk added, "It is not wrong to step back when a relationship begins to harm your peace." The Buddha taught, "Do not let the behavior of others destroy your inner peace." Protecting your peace allows you to give from a place of strength, not resentment. The next morning, Anna texted Jess, "Hey, I need some time to focus on myself. Let's catch up later this month." The message felt strange but also liberating. Jess's reply was short, filled with disappointment, but Anna resisted the urge to explain further. For the first time, she realized that stepping back didn't mean severing ties. It meant setting boundaries. During this time, Anna began new practices to protect her energy. She started journaling daily, reflecting on moments of peace and gratitude. She spent more time walking in the park, letting the sound of rustling leaves and birdsong fill her mind. Slowly, she felt the weight of guilt lift. When Anna and Jess finally met again, something had shifted. Jess began venting as usual, but Anna gently interrupted. "Jess, I hear you, and I'm sorry things have been tough. But I also want us to have conversations that leave us both feeling lighter." Jess looked startled but didn't argue. Anna's tone had no anger, only calm conviction. Over time, their relationship began to change. Jess's negativity lessened as Anna consistently redirected their conversations to more balanced topics. Some days, the change felt small, but Anna saw it as growth. The Buddha teaches that boundaries are not walls, they are gates. By stepping back, Anna learned that she wasn't shutting Jess out, but creating a healthier space for their friendship to thrive. She also discovered that protecting her peace allowed her to engage with Jess from a place of compassion rather than exhaustion. Anna's story reminds us that stepping back isn't selfish, it's necessary. As Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. By limiting her exposure to negativity, Anna reclaimed her energy and nurtured a relationship that, like the monk's fountain, could flow freely without overwhelming its source. 9. Seek solitude and reflection. The buzzing of notifications filled Sophie's small apartment, each chime pulling her further into a cycle of distraction. Work emails demanded urgent responses, group chats debated pointless topics, and social media overflowed with everyone's curated perfection. She scrolled aimlessly through her phone, her head pounding with exhaustion. Sophie had been feeling this way for weeks, overwhelmed, disconnected, and lost in the noise of modern life. "I just need everything to stop," she muttered, throwing her phone onto the couch. That evening, desperate for clarity, Sophie decided to visit a quiet lake on the outskirts of the city, a place she hadn't been since childhood. The air grew cooler as she approached, the sound of the city fading into the background. She found a small bench by the water and sat down, the rippling surface reflecting the fading light of the setting sun. For the first time in weeks, she felt her mind begin to quiet. As Sophie stared at the lake, a memory surfaced, something her grandmother had once told her. "A still lake reflects the sky perfectly, but if the water is disturbed, the reflection is lost." Your mind works the same way. The words felt true now in a way they never had before. Sophie realized she had been running from one task to another, never allowing herself a moment of stillness to reflect. The next morning, Sophie decided to visit the temple near her neighborhood. She had often walked by it, but had never stepped inside. The head monk, Venerable Surya, greeted her warmly, sensing her unease. "You seem burdened," he said. "Would you like to sit with me for a while?" Sophie nodded, and they sat together in the temple garden, surrounded by the sound of rustling leaves and distant birdsong. After a moment of silence, Sophie spoke. "I feel like I'm constantly surrounded by noise, work, people, my own thoughts. I don't know how to escape it." The monk smiled gently. "The Buddha teaches us that the noise of the world will never stop, but the noise in your mind can. True peace comes from within, not from outside." Sophie frowned. "But how? Even when I'm alone, my thoughts won't let me rest." The monk reached for a bowl of water nearby. He dipped his hand into the bowl and swirled it, creating ripples. "When the water is disturbed," he said, "can you see your reflection clearly?" Sophie shook her head. "No, it's distorted." The monk removed his hand, and the water slowly stilled. "But when the water is calm, the reflection returns," he said. "Your mind works the same way. Solitude and reflection are not about escaping your thoughts, but allowing them to settle, so you can see clearly again." Inspired, Sophie began incorporating moments of solitude into her daily life. Each morning, she set aside 10 minutes to sit quietly with her thoughts, letting them come and go without judgment. At first, it felt unnatural. Her mind resisted the stillness, racing with to-do lists and worries. But gradually, she found that these moments of calm became her refuge, a space where she could reconnect with herself. One afternoon, after a particularly chaotic day, Sophie returned to the lake. This time, she brought a journal. Sitting by the water, she began to write, pouring out her thoughts and emotions onto the page. The act of writing felt like unburdening her mind, and when she finished, she felt lighter. Over time, Sophie noticed subtle changes in herself. She no longer reacted impulsively to every message or demand. When colleagues commented on her newfound calm, she smiled and said simply, "I've learned to take a step back." The Buddha's teaching echoed in her mind. When the mind is silent, joy naturally arises. She realized that solitude wasn't loneliness. It was an opportunity to listen to her own heart, free from the noise of the world. Marcus Aurelius's wisdom also resonated with her. "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." Sophie learned that true solitude wasn't about escaping others. It was about finding stillness within herself, even in the midst of chaos. Through her journey, Sophie discovered that solitude and reflection weren't luxuries, they were necessities. Like the still lake that reflected the sky, her moments of calm allowed her to see her life clearly, to navigate its challenges with grace and resilience. And in that stillness, she found the peace she had been searching for all along. 10. Control your judgments. Lila's heart sank as she looked at the feedback on her project. It was harsh, bordering on cruel. Her manager's notes filled the margins. "This is sloppy, unclear, redo completely." She gritted her teeth, staring at the page. It wasn't the first time he'd been critical, but this felt personal. Her friends had warned her about him. "He's impossible to please," they'd said. "Just ignore him." But Lila couldn't. Every critique felt like a personal attack, each word echoing her deepest fears. Am I not good enough? Am I wasting my time here? By the end of the day, her frustration had boiled over. She slammed her laptop shut and decided to take a long walk. As she wandered through the city, she found herself outside a quiet tea house she had passed many times but never entered. On impulse, she stepped inside. The owner, an elderly woman with a serene demeanor, greeted her warmly and guided her to a small table by a fountain. Seeing Lila's troubled expression, the woman asked softly, "Would you like to share what's on your mind?" At first, Lila hesitated, but the calming atmosphere encouraged her. She recounted her experience, her voice heavy with frustration. "I worked so hard on that project, and all he could do was tear it apart. It's like he's out to get me." The woman nodded thoughtfully and said, "Let me tell you a story." She gestured to the fountain. "Once, there was a traveler who came across a clear spring in the mountains. He knelt to drink the water, but found it bitter. Angry, he blamed the spring for its taste. Another traveler arrived and tasted the same water, but found it sweet. Puzzled, the first traveler asked how this could be. The second traveler smiled and said, 'Perhaps the bitterness comes not from the spring, but from what I carried in my cup.'" Lila frowned. "Are you saying the problem is me?" The woman shook her head gently. "Not at all. But sometimes, our judgments color how we experience the world. What if your manager's feedback isn't about you, but about what the project needs? Could it be an opportunity to improve, rather than a personal attack?" The words struck Lila. She had been so focused on her feelings that she hadn't considered the possibility that her manager's harshness might stem from high expectations or even his own insecurities. The next day, Lila approached her project with fresh eyes. She read through the feedback again, this time focusing on the specific issues rather than the tone. She realized that while the comments were blunt, they weren't wrong. There were gaps in her work, places where she could add clarity and detail. She revised the project with care, addressing each critique. When she turned it in, she added a note, "Thank you for your feedback. It helped me see where I could improve. I hope this version meets your expectations." Her manager called her into his office later that week. Lila braced herself for more criticism, but to her surprise, he said, "This is excellent work. You've addressed everything I pointed out and made it even better than I expected. Well done." For the first time, Lila saw him not as an adversary, but as someone who had pushed her to grow. She realized her initial judgment had blinded her to the value in his critique. Over time, Lila learned to approach challenges with curiosity instead of defensiveness. When faced with criticism, she paused and asked herself, "Is this really about me? Or is there something I can learn here?" She stopped judging others' intentions based on her own fears and began focusing on what she could control, her response. The Buddha teaches, "Your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your own unguarded thoughts." Lila saw how her judgments had amplified her suffering, and by letting them go, she found freedom. Marcus Aurelius's wisdom echoed this lesson. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Through her journey, Lila discovered that controlling her judgments didn't mean ignoring reality. It meant choosing to see the bigger picture, finding opportunities for growth even in criticism, and reclaiming her peace. Like the fountain's water, her perspective was shaped not by the world, but by what she brought to it. And as she learned to carry clarity instead of bitterness, her world became infinitely sweeter. 11. Remember, this too shall pass. The hospital waiting room was eerily quiet despite the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional muffled voice of a nurse. Maya sat hunched in a chair, her hands gripping a cup of cold coffee. Her mother had collapsed at home hours earlier, and the doctors were still running tests. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each passing minute filled with fear and unanswered questions. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, friends and family checking in, but she couldn't bring herself to reply. She stared blankly at the rows of empty chairs, her thoughts racing. What if it's serious? What if it's too late? The uncertainty felt suffocating. As the hours dragged on, Maya noticed an elderly man sitting across from her. He looked calm, almost serene, despite the tension in the room. In his lap, he held a small book that he flipped through slowly. The title caught her eye: Impermanence, the River of Life. Curiosity outweighed her hesitation. "Excuse me," she said softly. "That book, does it help?" The man looked up and smiled kindly. "It helps remind me that all things pass," he said, his voice steady. "The good, the bad, none of it lasts forever." Maya's shoulders slumped. "I wish I could believe that right now. My mother's in there, and I don't even know what's happening." The man nodded, closing the book. "I've been in this room before. Years ago. It was my wife. I remember sitting here, just like you, thinking the worst. But do you know what I realized?" Maya shook her head, eager for anything to hold on to. "What?" "The moment I stopped trying to fight the uncertainty, I found peace. I reminded myself, this moment, however painful, is just a ripple in the river. It will pass, as all things do." The man's words stayed with Maya as the hours wore on. She thought about the image of a river, how it flowed endlessly, carrying both calm waters and storms. She realized she had been clinging to the storm, letting it overwhelm her. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, focusing on the steady rhythm of her breathing. "This too shall pass," she whispered to herself. For the first time that night, her chest felt a little lighter. When the doctor finally emerged hours later, the news was cautiously optimistic. Maya's mother had experienced a minor stroke, but was stable and expected to recover fully with proper care. Relief flooded through her, and tears she hadn't realized she was holding back streamed down her face. In the days that followed, Maya found herself reflecting on the man's words. She began to notice the impermanence of everything around her, the changing colors of the sky at dusk, the fleeting laughter of a child in the park, even her own emotions. She realized that clinging to any one moment, whether good or bad, only created unnecessary suffering. She visited the temple near her home and spoke with the head monk about her experience. He listened attentively and shared the Buddhist teaching: everything that arises will pass away. The wise see this and find peace in the midst of life's storms. Maya asked, "But how do you accept impermanence when it feels like the pain will last forever?" The monk smiled. "By staying in the present. The storm seems endless because we replay it in our minds or fear its return. But if you focus on this moment, this breath, you will see that even the storm has quiet moments within it." Maya began practicing mindfulness daily, grounding herself in the present whenever anxiety arose. At work, when deadlines loomed and stress mounted, she would pause, take a deep breath, and remind herself, this too shall pass. When her mother faced difficult days in recovery, Maya stayed present, focusing on the small victories, a smile, a conversation, a shared moment of calm. Over time, she noticed a profound shift in her perspective. Challenges no longer felt insurmountable. They were just ripples in the river, passing with time. Even moments of joy felt richer because she embraced them without clinging, knowing they were as fleeting as a beautiful sunset. Months later, Maya returned to the hospital for a checkup with her mother. As they waited, she spotted the elderly man who had spoken to her that night. She walked over and introduced herself, thanking him for his words. The man smiled warmly. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "The river always flows. You just needed a reminder to let it carry you." As Maya left the hospital, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for her mother's recovery, but for the lesson she had learned. Life would always have storms, but she now understood the truth in the Buddha's words: do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. By embracing impermanence, Maya found the strength to face life's challenges with calm and resilience, knowing that no storm could last forever. Conclusion: achieving true freedom. As we conclude this journey, one truth becomes undeniable: true freedom begins within. Throughout this second part, we've explored how to face rejection with strength, overcome the fear of judgment, and let go of the need to sacrifice your peace to please others. We've learned to focus not on what we can't control, but on what truly matters: our inner growth and authentic selves. The wisdom of Buddhism reminds us, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. And Marcus Aurelius challenges us to remember, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. These teachings guide us to transform challenges into opportunities, reminding us that every obstacle is a chance to strengthen our character and deepen our understanding. Now, as you step back into the world, ask yourself, what will I choose to prioritize? Others' expectations or my own peace? Each day offers a new opportunity to practice these lessons, to rise above negativity, and to walk the path of resilience and self-mastery. If this journey has inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that they, too, can find strength within. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe to stay connected as we continue exploring the wisdom that leads to true freedom. Together, let's build a life of peace, purpose, and unshakable strength.